All right, folks. Do a little live stream here before we head out for the holiday weekend. We have a holiday weekend coming up here. Hey, so again, I want to keep beating up on these new skills that are going to be required in the future here. And remember, we said, I've been harping on critical thinking. Critical thinking is going to be a skill that's in great demand coming up in the future, and it always has been. Complex problem solving. How do we solve those complex problems, and how do we go about learning to do so? Data literacy. Data literacy includes my favorite topic, the statistical thinking. How is it that we can develop our statistical thinking in this age of AI and automation where people are going to start losing their jobs or be shifted into jobs that are going to require some of these skills? Data analytics, innovation, and of course, my favorite, strategic thinking. Dan Feliciano, OpEx 90, here to share the love with you. So, this is another reading from the book of Dan. I was asked, Dan, is it that you can go about how is it that you can go about and help people become critical thinkers? You said, and I've said this in the past, that I can ask 5 questions and quickly discern if someone is a critical thinker or not. And I still hold that to be the case. But I'm going to share with you some questions that you might start to pose to people to start understanding and developing your critical thinking skills and to see how well the people that you're talking with, how well they've thought through their process. So one of the things is it's the my favorite time of the year, election season, right? Every Tom, Dick, and Harry's running for office. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry says they're critical thinkers, complex problem solvers, data literate, innovative, right? And we know that's not the case. That 99% of these folks have no idea really what they're doing. But let's not cast any shame on them. Let them run. Someone needs to do that dirty work for us. So I thought it would be interesting for me to provide you with a list of questions that you can ask people to check their critical thinking. How well are they processing data? So, for instance, and we'll use political candidates, right? These are folks that are going to get thrown away anyway. A lot of people running for office. So, here are some questions that you can ask to help see how well their critical thinking is. So, we're going to beat up on the politicians today, right? It's one of the favorite things we like to do here. So, first of all, you'll hear politicians talking about the affordability crisis. We have an affordability crisis across this nation of ours, and I have a plan to take care of it. So, your first question to everyone who's claiming that affordability is a problem is to ask, how do you measure affordability and what should it be? Do you know what it is you're measuring and why you're measuring it? And they'll look at you like, right? That we're checking for understanding the data that they're using. So if they're claiming there's an affordability crisis, they must know how to measure that affordability crisis. And then they've somehow reached out to some people and come to consensus that this affordability crisis is going to be quantified as X, and we're going to make improvements to it, right? So you'll have a bunch of clowns out there running for office saying, we have an affordability crisis. Say, okay, when do we know we're out of that affordability crisis? Just ask that question. What data are you going to use to ensure that we're out of this affordability crisis? Who gets to determine what that is? So, right there, that's a critical thinking question. You're saying, okay, we have a crisis. I know it's a crisis because the metric reads this, and we're going to measure that metric and we're going to have an impact on it. So, that first question is I'm checking to see how they've quantified a topic. So, you want to ask that question of anyone. And if you can't do that, you're in big trouble. If you go around, talking about issues and problems within your organization and you can't clearly quantify what a good number is from a bad number, you're already starting out on the wrong foot. So that's a great place to start is asking that question of what defines the affordability crisis? How do you measure that affordability crisis? And how would we know when we're beyond that affordability crisis? That's a great question. And it's not meant to be a stump to chump question, wink, wink, but it's a great question to ask. Now, these same people that are running for office right? We're testing for critical thinking acumen again here. These same people running for office will say, "Well, I have a plan to fix the affordability crisis." Great. Well, you just couldn't articulate how we measure it and how we know when we're out of that affordability crisis, but somehow you have a plan. We're not going after that plan right away, though, right? We can tear it. I can give you a list of questions that, we're not playing stump the chump. We're trying to understand where they're coming from. But here's what we need to do. Okay. Why do we have affordability crisis? That's what you need to ask. Why do we have affordability crisis? What is driving that affordability crisis? And again, people are going to default to their party's best lines, and they might say X, Y, and Z. So here's what we're doing. We are not just asking, why do we have an affordability crisis? When they give a response, we're going to say, why is that? They might say, we have an affordability crisis. Why do we have an affordability crisis? Because the rich aren't paying their fair share. Okay, why aren't the rich paying their fair share? Right. And then we can go down and keep asking questions, right? That's a pet answer that you're going to get depending on what party or person you're talking to. So we have to understand the whys behind it. So once they say it's because the rich aren't paying their fair share or something along those lines, the next question to be a critical thinker and what you should be thinking about, and the questions that'll be posed to you by critical thinkers is great. List off all the possible causes of the affordability crisis. Right? Now we're checking to see did they do their homework? Are they really thinking about this? And we're using affordability crisis as an example. Remember, folks, here we are talking about developing our critical thinking skills, and we're using politicians as our guinea pigs. So we're harping on affordability crisis. So politicians say we have an affordability crisis. How do you know we have a crisis? How do you measure that it's a crisis? How do we measure when we're out of that crisis, right? Can those politicians answer that for you? Probably not. That's again critical thinking skill. And then we ask, okay, why do we have affordability crisis? And they're going to come back to corporations aren't paying their fair share, the rich aren't paying their fair share. They're going to come up with, politicians come up with 1,000 reasons. But your question as a critical thinker, and that's going to be asked of you by a critical thinker, is great. Give me all the possible causes of the affordability crisis. List them all out, please. And then you have them understanding, right? If there are critical thinkers and complex problem solvers, they'll be able to list dozens of reasons why they believe or potential causes that reflect that would manifest itself in an affordability crisis. So now you have a politician and you're asking them, great, let's get off your stump speech. Let's give me all the possible causes of the potential causes of an affordability crisis. So if they can answer you with more than one or two of their favorite news channels, talking points, you'd be lucky. Your next question, if you're being a critical thinker and what's going to be asked of you of a critical thinker, like we're having a conversation, is great. That's an interesting list of potential causes. How did you vet that list of potential causes and whittle it down to the cause that you're going after? What you believe to be that root cause. What techniques did you use to get there? And they'll say, "Oh, I don't know." So what we're checking for is not only have they thought about the possible causes of an affordability crisis, but they had some objective way of narrowing down a gazillion of these possible causes to the handful that they're going to address. Now, once if they can do that, which is unlikely, because you're going to say, "Oh, great! How did you narrow it down from all the dozens of potential causes you listed? What techniques did you use to narrow it down to the few potential causes that you're going to develop that you develop your solution around?" And they won't have a good answer for you. They're going to say, "We have a focus group. I heard from voters." Again, it's going to be all garbage, right? So again, we're unmasking that person that is not a critical thinker or a complex problem solver. So what we've done is we went from their issue, trying to understand how we quantify that issue and how we know we're beyond it, and then what are all the potential possible root causes they considered, and then how did they evaluate those possible causes to the vital few that they actually decided to pursue? Now that is critical thinking, right? We're getting to the nuts and bolts of what created that problem. So that is an easy way to start to unmask the person that is, and we're beating up on politicians today, unmask the person that is just talking party line and just talking, just going along with whatever it is that's said. And you're going to find that the vast majority of people can't answer that question. So if we were working together and you brought something to me, I would be asking you those questions. You better be prepared to answer those questions, right? So, what other questions can we ask to unmask the meme complex problem solver or critical thinker? So we already know that we've just unmasked them. They don't have a good way of quantifying their issue at hand or their problem at hand, and they didn't really vet all the potential causes. And if they do have a short list of potential causes, they can't explain to you how they arrived on the critical cause or causes that they plan to address. So that's easily one of the best ways to start thinking about critical problem solving. So, we're having fun talking about politicians, but the same applies to you. If we meet and you say, "Hey, Dan, I come in as a consultant. We have this problem over here. Here's the solution." I'm going to know, how do we know it's a problem? How did you quantify it's a problem? How do we know when this problem's been resolved? And if you can answer those questions, we'll continue the conversation. And then I'll want to know, okay, what were all the potential causes that you evaluated? And then how did you narrow it down? I'm checking again to see if you have a good reasoning, good critical thinking. So that is just one simple technique that I use to unmask the meme critical thinkers that exist out there. And you can start using this technique right away. You have politicians that are running around right now, knocking on doors, grabbing you coming out of the restaurants and things like that, asking you all sorts of questions. Just consider what I've just shared with you and ask those handful of questions. How do you know this is a problem? How would we know when that problem is solved, right? And it's gonna be something quantifiable. So they probably can't answer that. And then again, what were all the potential causes that you considered? And then what techniques did you use to narrow it down after, to understand what problem you're gonna tackle and how to tackle that problem? So I don't think you're going to find many politicians, and we're starting with them because we don't want to offend anybody on our team. You start asking questions like that. When people bring a problem to me and I start asking these questions, they're feeling like they're underneath a microscope and they're being tortured. But I'm genuinely trying to understand, how do we solve a problem here and how do we know we have a problem? If you can get through that, right? And you're going to get all sorts of generalizations from, and we'll keep with politicians because they're the easiest ones to beat up. They're going to give you generalizations, party line things. But again, we are interested in critical thinking and what it is we're doing for our tax law. So then the next question, of course, is going to be, great. What were all the possible solutions that you generated? Right? They're gonna come to you with a plan. We're gonna tax the rich. We're gonna tax big companies. They need to pay their fair share. Okay. What were the other possible solutions besides those talking points that you considered? And again, we want to know, how robust was their thinking? How out of the box was it? Did they really consider other possible solutions? And then again, our favorite question, how did you narrow down those solutions into the ones that you plan on implementing? What objective techniques did you use? And again, they're going to fall back on party line. So those are just a handful of techniques, just a few little questions that, I said in previous videos that I can ask someone to really determine if they're a critical problem solver, a critical thinker, or a complex problem solver. So let me recap for you again. We're going into Memorial Day weekend. I'm here in the US. Politicians are going to be out in full force clamoring for your vote. So here's the things you want to make sure they ask you. If they bring up a problem, you want to know, okay, how do we quantify that problem and how do we know we're out of that problem? But more importantly, who got to define that this is a problem? See if they can answer that question. And then they're going to tell you they have a solution. We want to take a step backwards, and you're going to ask them, what were all the possible solutions that you considered, and how did you narrow it down to the vital few that you thought were important to go after? What technique did you use? Share that with me. Help me understand how you think about these problems, and they're not going to be able to do so. So right there, they're pivoting off of you and to someone else. And then of course, if they present and say, "Look, I have the solution," and let's say you get the rope a dope and you get suckered into listening to their pitch because you weren't stubborn enough to follow up and with discipline questions. They'll say, "Okay, great. What were all the other possible solutions you've considered? You have this idea and this great plan, but what were the other possible solutions that you considered, and how did you land on this one? What did you use to vet it and come up with you're gonna tax the wealthy," right? That's a favorite of mine, right? That's a solution to everything. But we wanna know what were all the other things that you considered, and then how did you objectively narrow it down to this one solution? So, if you just listen to this video and replay it, listen to it as a podcast and think about these questions, and you need to be prepared to answer these questions as well. You're bringing a problem to someone, they're gonna ask, how did you measure it? What makes you think this measure is the right measure, right? How do we know when we've had the problem resolved, right? What were all the other potential causes of this problem? Did you consider these other causes? How did you narrow it down to these few causes? Because remember, politicians are coming to you with answers, with solutions, and we want to take a step backwards, right? We want to say, okay, how did you get there? Because we're checking for critical thinking, right? There's no lack of bills or laws that have been passed that were intended to be good that got us nowhere, right? That we can measure and move forward on. So if you're going to develop your critical thinking skills, consider the questions that we've just addressed. And I think you're going to be light years ahead. So we're not just playing stump the chump with politicians, right? They're just fun to play with. But we are saying we need to be able to answer those questions. Dan, how do you know? How do you know this number is bad? Oh, because here's the standard that we agreed to. If we can get it to this place, we know it's going to be good. Dan, great. What were all the possible causes of that? Okay, here are all the possible causes, and here's the technique that we use to narrow it down, and here's why we believe this is the possible causes we should address. Great. What were all the possible solutions that you generated? Here were all the possible solutions. Here's how we narrowed it down to these few, and these are what we're going with. We're going to give these a try, and here's some measures how we're going to measure our effectiveness. Right there is the beginning. I'm not giving away the farm yet. That is the beginning of becoming a critical thinker and a critical questioner, right? In leadership positions, we should be asking these questions, right? On the other end, if we're talking to leaders, we need to be able to answer these questions proactively. So the tip of the day is, you know, I want you to become a critical thinker. It's go in a complex problem solver. It is in demand. AI and automation is going to wipe out a lot of work. It's going to create other work, but not everyone's going to be qualified for it. Not everyone's going to be comfortable using AI or a prompt engineer. But we know critical thinking, complex problem solving, data literacy, data analytics, innovation, and strategic thinking are the skills that are surfacing to the top. So I hope you take this to heart, start thinking about it. You should be able to answer these questions yourself when asked. And then if you want to practice asking those questions and checking people for critical thinking, start with your politicians. They're running around and they're going to be talking to you, and you're going to find that well, 90% of them are clueless, right? And God say, they say God save the king or whatever, but we need to figure out what it is we're doing, and you need to figure out what you're doing. So develop those critical thinking skills by maybe first by understanding how to ask these questions and find out how people try to navigate around it because they can't answer them, and then be prepared to answer these questions. Someone's going to ask these questions of you, and if you're a good critical thinker and a complex problem solver, you'll be able to address those questions. So I just wanted to create a quick little video for you. It's been a while since I've been out here, so um, develop those skills, folks. Develop your critical thinking skills. Develop your complex problem solving skills. Put your, you know, Put away your ego. Everyone says they're fantastic at this stuff. Again, I just exposed you to some questions that you probably couldn't answer, and I have a lot more. I'll, come here, kitty, 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 whack, and I'm going to get you because you're going to fail along that way. But take the time to learn these skills, and then if not learn these skills, at least understand and ask these same questions, these critical thinking questions of other people to see how you would respond and to get an idea of how you can start to drill in more deeply because the politicians, I say politicians because they're going to deviate from it, they're going to generalize it. They did this in California, they did this in Europe, right? It becomes all these generalizations, right, without having good facts behind them and good skills. So go ahead, folks, develop those critical thinking skills. How do we know this is a problem? What is the measure that, what measure are you using? When we measure it, how do we know that problem's been resolved? What were all the possible causes that you considered? And that'll give you a few. And then how did you narrow down those causes? Not just, oh, we had a survey, we did this. How did you narrow it down to come up with these vital few things that you're developing solutions around? And if you start asking those questions and you can answer those questions, you're on your way to becoming a critical thinker and a complex problem solver. AI is here, automation's here. We have no alternatives, man. We have to develop these skills and learn how to leverage AI automation as well as understanding how to be critical thinkers, complex problem solvers, data literate, data improve our data analytics, innovative, and a strategic thinker. So, folks, we'll see you soon. I'll have a video coming out. I mean, I hope you enjoy these. Um, I love this dark music. We listen to this music. If you have any questions, then drop them in the chat. I can see some people are in here. Don't be shy. I'm not going to bite your head off. We're going to get some good lessons here. And this is another reading from the book that Dan. I hope you internalize this and put these skills to use and start to developing these skills. Keep keep coming back, like, share, communicate, podcast, whatever it is that they tell you to do all that good stuff. And I'll be back with more videos here in the near future. Have a great one, folks. And again, what we're doing is developing those critical problem solving skills, the critical thinking and complex problem solving skills. Ciao. We'll see you soon. Have a good